Chapter 391. Nolan answered the phone. Yes? Mr. Goldman, Stone attacked Instructor Leach in the training camp, but thanks to Mr. Boucher, Instructor Leach is alright, but, Nolan dropped the ashes of his cigarette into a can of Coke. A dark light crossed his eyes as he asked. But what? When we were trying to intercept Stone at the junction, his car exploded. Stone is dead. Nolan was stunned after he heard what Hans had said. He threw the butt of the cigarette into the can, releasing a slight hissing sound into the air. Then, he asked sternly, exploded? Did someone plant a bomb in his car? Hans replied, yes. It seems like someone is trying to get rid of him. Nolan gave a chortle and didn't say anything. Judging from the fact that Rowena would go to the extent of getting rid of her own man. She must have believed that Stone had betrayed her. Besides, he was certain that Rowena was going to kill Stone either way, even if he managed to get rid of Instructor Leach. Did something happen? Maisie's voice pulled him back from his thoughts. Nolan hung up the call and turned his head around to look at her, who had just woken up. He offered her a smile and said, "You're awake?" "Yeah, a long time ago." She had heard everything, so she asked, "Did the plan fail again?" "Instructor Leach is injured." Maisie lowered her head. "It seems like Rowena is more cold-hearted than we thought. Not only was she willing to take other people's lives, but she was not going to let her men live as well when she suspected them of betraying her." Wrapping his arm around her waist, Nolan carried her on his lap. "Stone is dead. But that doesn't mean that she's safe. After all, the evidence we have right now is more than sufficient." Maisie nodded. The man at the summer pavilion, Instructor Leach, and Mr. Winters were their trump cards to take down Rowena. Now that Rowena had killed one of her own men, would they still help her to keep the secret? Maisie doubted so. Nolan brought Maisie to Summer Pavilion once again in the evening. The wound on the man's face had formed into a scab. Although he still looked like a mess, he had been living in peace in the past few days. Sitting on a couch, he asked, "How is my brother?" Nolan replied, "Your brother is injured. Stone tried to kill him." The man was stunned for a moment, and then his face turned grim. After that, Nolan walked to one side and sat with his leg crossed. "Stone is dead too." "What?" The man was surprised. He looked as if he did not believe that Stone was dead. Nolan pulled out a packet of cigarettes and handed one to him. "Rowena killed him." The man's hands trembled when he took over the cigarette. Then, the light in his eyes dimmed as he said, Have you all found out everything?" It occurred to the man that they already knew the mastermind was Rowena. Maisie then chimed in and said slowly, "It's not that hard to find out, honestly. Now you know that Stone nearly killed your brother. Instructor Leach and Rowena didn't let Stone go away." As she was talking, she looked at him. "If you hadn't fallen into our hands, you'd be dead by now." The man did not say anything. Maisie was right. If they hadn't caught him, he would have been dead meat right now. After a long while, he finally made up his mind and said, "All right. I'll tell you everything I know." The man lit up the cigarette with a lighter and took a long drag. He said, "Other than the Winters and Winona, she also instructed Stone to kill another person. I just know that she was a staff member from the Black Gold group." Nolan frowned deeply but did not say anything. Maisie was stunned. She was a Black Gold staff member? Who is she? The man lifted his head to look at Maisie. "I don't know. Stone didn't tell me her name. He never did anything but obey instructions given by Miss Summers. No matter who Miss Summers asked him to take out, he would go, and that day it was me who went with him." Chapter 392. Nolan sent a text message to Quincy. After a while, Quincy found something and replied to him. Nolan threw his phone on the table and asked, "Is it this woman?" The man took a look at the phone and nodded. Maisie took the phone and looked at the female staff member. Isn't she Meryl from the administrative department? What has she done to make Rowena send someone to kill her? Maisie looked at Nolan and asked, how did you know it's her? Nolan then replied flatly, she has been absent from work for a few days. So it isn't hard to get her information. Meryl had not been coming to work and without giving any reason on top of that. None of her colleagues knew where she had been, and neither could they get through to her. Her stuff was still on her desk. And the administrative department manager had told Quincy about it. Therefore, Nolan knew she must be the one the man was talking about. The man added, Stone killed her, and I was the one who got rid of her corpse. I brought her dead body to the suburbs and buried it in a forest. Maisie pressed her lips tightly. After a long while of silence, she looked at him and asked, are you guys not worried about getting retribution for your actions? The man scoffed. She gives us money, we work for her. That's how our world works. We can barely keep ourselves alive. So why should we be worried about the so-called retribution? He took another drag from the cigarette and continued. I admit that I have killed people and that I'm definitely not a good soul. I might end up dying beside the street one day, but as long as it doesn't affect my brother. I wouldn't mind if I were imprisoned or got the death penalty. Maisie clenched her fist tightly. The man in front of her was not entirely cold-blooded. Had the world been nicer to him, he wouldn't have to go down such a path. She could see that he cared about his brother a lot. After all, blood was thicker than water. Nolan looked at him and asked, Stone was a member of the training camp. If my memory serves me right, he was from the batch that attended the assessment to join the headquarters. The man was stumped for a while before nodding. Yes. Stone is strong. All of the people who have been under him before admire him a lot. He's very loyal to Miss Summers, and he would introduce people he trusts to Miss Summers, and I'm one of them. Honestly, I didn't know Stone's identity in the beginning. I just knew that he came from a powerful organization. And it was only until later that I learned that he worked for the Goldmans. As for why he would follow Miss Summers, I guess he loved her. Half of the cigarette in the man's hand had turned cold, all of us could see it. Stone was fiercely loyal to Miss Summers. And the way he looked at her was different from how he looked at other people. Unfortunately, Rowena just treated him as one of her pawns. Otherwise, she would not have killed him, the man who had been by her side for the longest time. In Rowena's perspective, these people were her pawns that could be disposed of at any time. The street was slowly filled with the lamp's neon lights that lit up one after another. The car was running at a steady pace on the road. Maisie looked at the street through the window, sinking into deep thought. It was only when a warm hand clutched at her cold hand that she snapped back to reality. What's on your mind? Nolan slowed the car down. He held her with one hand, his eyes still looking ahead. Maisie laughed. Nothing. I just find it funny that Rowena has been staying by your grandfather's side for so long, yet he has never suspected her. Nolan frowned slightly and said, this is because she's Mr. Summers' only granddaughter. Even if she did something wrong, Grandpa would forgive her because of the Summers. Suddenly, Maisie thought of something and turned her head around. She looked at him and chuckled. By the way, you guys have known each other since you were kids, right? I always heard that childhood friends get along very well with each other, so why don't you like her? After all, people in a favorable position would get what they wanted first. If Rowena had put more effort and Nolan liked her, Maisie was certain that she wouldn't have stood a chance. Chapter 393. Nolan grabbed her hand tightly, causing her to wince in pain. Hey, it hurts. What's going on? Can't I even ask? He chuckled. There's no reason. I just don't like her. Maisie retracted her hand and crossed her arms in front of her chest. How about other girls? Have you never fallen in love with any woman before? Nolan turned his eyes around and said, nope. After that, he asked, how about you? Have you ever fallen in love with any man before me? Maisie thought for a while and replied with a smile, yes, there is one. I had a crush on my senior when I was in college. When she saw that Nolan's face had turned dark, she chuckled and added, there were a lot of girls who had a crush on him. He was handsome and had good grades. I wasn't the only one. Besides, he didn't even know me. So. You wish that he knew you? Nolan said, his voice filled with jealousy. Maisie let out a laugh and replied, nope, nope. I already have you, the most handsome and successful man, by my side, so how is there any possibility I would think about other men? As soon as she finished speaking, Nolan seized the chance while the car stopped at the intersection to wait for the red light. He grabbed the back of her head with his big hand and planted a kiss on her lips. Maisie was stunned for a moment, and her face flushed. She pushed him away softly and mumbled, stop it. Nolan. Nolan lifted his brows as exhilaration filled him whole. When they returned to Blue Bay Villa, Nolan pressed her against the wall and began kissing her as soon as they stepped into the house. He traced his finger over her skin, kissing on her lips while Maisie wrapped her arms around his neck. He yanked off the hairband that she used to tie her hair, letting her long hair flow down her back in a cascade. Her clothes were on the verge of falling, and it made her look very charming. Before they could move on to the next step, his phone rang. Maisie then urged him intermittently, Nolan, you should answer it first. Nolan's gaze turned cold. He was obviously displeased by the sudden interruption. However, he did not covet this moment of pleasure either. After releasing her, he pulled his phone out and answered the call. What is it? Quincy's voice then rang out from the phone, Mr. Goldman, that man is dead. When Maisie and Nolan got to the police station, Quincy was talking to the cops outside of the mortuary. When Quincy saw Nolan, he said, Mr. Goldman, he was shot outside of the summer pavilion. There were a lot of people at that time, and the frightened crowd called the police. Maisie's expression changed. She suddenly thought of something and said, then Instructor Leach, it occurred to them that Rowena was going to kill all the proof. Nolan looked at Quincy, and the latter understood what he wanted him to do. He hurriedly pulled his phone out, made a call to Hans, and told him to stay by Instructor Leach's side at all times. Nolan went to speak with the cop at the side. As for Maisie, she took a seat at the bench and fell into thoughts. Soon, the cops left. Nolan walked up to her, bent forward, and put his hands on her shoulders. What's wrong? Nolan. I think we're being followed. She couldn't think of any reason how Rowena knew that man was in the summer pavilion. Not only that, but she had only made her move after all of them had left. After all, there was no way she could do it inside of the summer pavilion since Nolan's men were guarding there. Nolan pressed his lips tightly but did not say anything. Maisie thought of something else and turned to look at him. Did she send someone to keep a tab on me? If not, why would she appear at SS Restaurant with your grandfather that day? Besides, she even knew I was meeting with Hernandez. If Rowena did not know she was meeting with Hernandez, then why would she prevent Maisie from leaving SS Restaurant? Chapter 394. Hadn't she deliberately been stalling so that Titus would run into her and Hernandez? Nolan seemed to be mulling over what she had just said. Resting her chin on her hand, Maisie continued. If it really is her man, then she could have asked them to get rid of me. Could it be that she's just keeping an eye on me? Nolan stood up and turned his eyes around. It seems like she has taken advantage of the people around her. People around her? But nobody else knows that I went to SS Restaurant other than you and, someone popped in her head. And she gasped. Nolan sneered, I guess it's time to teach her that not everyone in this world is good. The next day, Nolan summoned Sherry to the administrative office. Scratching her head, she walked into Nolan's office. After taking a look at Quincy, she asked, Are you looking for me, Mr. Goldman? The day I asked you to go to Pixie up at SS Restaurant, did you tell anyone else about it? Nolan asked without raising his head as she flipped through the documents in his hand. I told Rowena about it, Sherry answered without any hesitation. She was with me that morning when you called me, so I told her about it. Quincy rubbed his forehead and hissed through gritted teeth. Are you an idiot, Sherry? Did you tell Rowena everything? You wouldn't have told her the whereabouts of the man we caught too. Would you? He couldn't believe that his sister would be so naive. She had been taken advantage of by other people, and she had yet to realize it. Sherry was confused. What happened? Why couldn't I tell Rowena about it? She seemed rather concerned about the matter to me. Quincy shook his head helplessly after he heard what Sherry had said. It seemed that she was the one who had told Rowena about it. Nolan threw the documents on the table. His eyes were cold as he growled. You really are the most idiotic person I've ever seen. Don't you know that Rowena is the mastermind behind all this? After that, she said incredulously, Are you sure about it, Mr. Goldman? Rowena is so kind and gentle. How could she be the mastermind? Quincy sighed. He walked to her side and said, Sherry, all the evidence we collected is pointing toward Rowena. Do you know that the man we captured was killed last night after you told Rowena? Sherry's expression changed. So was it her mistake? She was the one who had told Rowena everything. Mr. Goldman, brother, I'm sorry. I promise I won't simply tell other people anything anymore. Sherry was so guilt-ridden that she was on the verge of crying. After all, she had made a big mistake. Sherry trusted Rowena a lot, so she had told Rowena about the man. She did not expect that she would be the main culprit at all. Nolan looked at her and asked, What have you told her? I told her that we caught that person in the hospital. Rowena asked me where he was taken to. I thought she had nothing to do with it. So I told her that he's at the summer pavilion, Sherry replied honestly. She really wanted to slap herself in the face. Quincy heaved out a sigh of relief inwardly. He felt relieved that he had not told his sister everything. If not, Rowena would have learned of Mr. Winters's location and the show he and Nolan had put up that night. After getting rid of Stone, Quincy was certain that Rowena would go to complain to Titus. Just when Quincy was about to say something, Nolan said, Now you know the gravity of the situation? Sherry nodded. The corner of Nolan's lips turned up a little as he said coldly, Now that you know, I have a task for you. Take it as an opportunity to make up for your mistakes. Sherry's eyes lit up, and she replied excitedly, Don't worry. Mr. Goldman. I won't let you down. At the Goldman Mansion. Chapter 395. Rowena walked toward the table with a cup of coffee in her hand and placed it on the table. Seeing that Titus had been cold to her recently, she knew that he was holding a grudge against her after that night Nolan had nearly gotten into an accident. She bit her lips and said in a pitiful manner, Grandpa, I already found out who wanted to harm Nolan. It's Stone. Titus was stunned. He put the newspaper down and raised his head to look at her, his face gloomy. Stone? The guy I sent you? Titus was familiar with Stone. Stone was responsible for giving assessments to those who wanted to join the night banquet. He had been working together with Hans in the night banquet. It was just that Titus had asked him to assist Rowena afterward. Rowena took a seat next to him and explained, Yes, it's him. Grandpa. I really had no idea that Stone would do something like that. You didn't know? Titus put the newspaper on the table. He takes orders from you. If you hadn't abetted him, how would he have the nerves to do such a thing? Rowena knew that Titus was still suspicious of her. She squeezed a few drops of tears from the comber of her eyes and said, Grandpa, you know how much I love Nolan. Even if I've admitted that I tried to hurt Maisie, I would never have hurt Nolan. Titus did not say anything. He seemed like he was mulling over the things she said. Grandpa. Stone has never wanted to work for me at all. He has never asked for my permission to do anything. Besides, he harbored such feelings for me and, Titus looked at her and asked, and what? Rowena bit her lips and said, he tried to force me to be with him, but I refused. I told him that I love Nolan and Nolan only. I guess that was the reason he tried to harm Nolan. I'm sorry, Grandpa. This is all my fault. Titus took a deep breath. If this was really the case, then Stone should have indeed tried to harm Nolan out of jealousy. Suddenly, Rowena pulled her sleeve up and showed Titus the scar on her arm. When I went to confront Stone, he tried to take me with him. I used a knife to defend myself, but he eventually snatched the knife away and cut me before I fled. Titus' face was filled with rage. How dare he? He's such a jackass. A hint of triumph crossed Rowena's eyes when she saw that Titus had taken pity on herself and believed what she said. Stone was dead, and nobody could prove her wrong. Even if they tried to look into it, they wouldn't be able to get anything. She just needed to push all the blame to Stone now, and Titus would not suspect her anymore. You lie to me. Rowena was stunned as a flicker of bad hunch rose from her stomach pit. Damn it. Why would she suddenly come here? When Titus saw Sherry was shouting at Rowena rudely. He frowned and barked, have you forgotten all the manners you learned in the training camp? Sherry was fearful of Titus, but she couldn't back away now. You can't blame me for this, Elder Master Goldman. Rowena lied to me. Rowena jerked up from the chair and walked up to her with a smile on her face. She grabbed her hand and said, Sherry, let's go out and talk. Grandpa needs to rest. Sherry flung her hand away. Stop touching me, you pretentious bitch. Let me ask you a question. Did you take advantage of me? You asked me the other day where the man Mr. Goldman and the others had arrested was. I told you where he was, and then he was killed last night. You did it, didn't you? Chapter 396. Sherry no longer cared about how she felt. Rowena's expression changed slightly, and she quickly said, Sherry, what are you talking about? Did someone tell you something? I really don't know, you're still trying to pretend. That person confessed that you're the one who did it before he died. Winona and her parents were all murdered by you. Sherry's words made Titus' expression turn gloomy as he glared at Rowena. Rowena's face was cold and stern. Sherry, do you know that you're slandering me by saying this? Winona and the Winters matter has nothing to do with me. Well, if this matter is a slander to you, then the fact that Mr. Goldman almost got into a car accident that night isn't a slander now, am I right? Sherry glanced at her and asked, you asked Stone to do that, didn't you? Stone is one of your men. Rowena clenched her hands tightly. Yes, it was Stone's doing. I just told Grandpa that Stone did that secretly behind my back and against my will. I don't even know anything about that. Seeing that Sherry did not trust her, Rowena grabbed her by her shoulders. Sherry, we used to be in the training camp together, don't you know how I treated you back then? All of you should know how I feel about Nolan, so why would I harm Nolan? Sherry was caught off guard by the fact that Rowena would admit that Stone was the one who did it. But she did not expect that she would push all the blame onto Stone. Sherry pushed her hand away and said with a grim face, Stone is now dead, so you're putting all the blame onto him now, aren't you? Titus was astounded. Stone is dead? Rowena turned to look at Titus. Grandpa. I really don't know about this. How did Stone die? He was still alive the day before yesterday. Sherry scoffed. Stop pretending already. Stone went to the training camp to assassinate Instructor Leach, but his car exploded all of a sudden when he was escaping. So please enlighten me. Why would the car explode so coincidentally? Is it because of a time bomb? This has nothing to do with me either. Rowena retorted vigorously. Sherry, how can you slander me like that without any evidence? You should at least show us some evidence or bring up a witness or two. Besides that, who asked you to come out here to say these? Rowena behaved innocently as if she had been extremely wronged and kept on refusing to admit that she had something to do with all these incidents. Before Sherry could speak, a voice came in from outside the door. "The evidence and witness that you're looking for is with me." It was Nicholas who walked in from the outside with a golden cane, and Hans was following him. Titus stood up from his seat as he was obviously surprised. Rowena's face paled slightly. How could it be Uncle Goldman? Nicholas looked at Titus with a calm expression. "Father, if you're too old to look at this matter objectively and can't see that you're being deceived, I can't just sit back and watch as your son." Nicholas walked up to the couch, sat down, and glared coldly at Rowena. "You grew up under the care of the Goldmans, and we Goldmans have never maltreated you all this while. But I didn't expect that you'd be merciless enough to make a move on my son and grandchildren." Rowena stepped forward and explained anxiously, "Sir, I didn't you don't have to explain anything to me." Nicholas raised his hand to interrupt her and asked Hans to turn on the laptop. "Let's watch this first." Hans turned on the laptop, and the video recording shown on the screen was the confession of the man from the other day. Who else could the Miss Summers that the man spoke of be? Other than Rowena Summers. Titus' expression became slightly gloomy when he saw the video, and surges of wrath could be seen looming in his eyes. Rowena shook her head as a hint of panic could be seen flashing across her eyes. "No. Stone did all this. He wanted to pull me down and put all the blame on me. I really don't know anything about it." Chapter 397. Nicholas picked up the teacup, took a sip out of it, and chuckled. "You don't know?" He then put down the teacup and said calmly, "That's because both Stone and this man are dead, and they can't be here to prove that this matter is related to you already. Right?" Rowena trembled. Nicholas then said to Hans, "Go and bring that man and that man?" "Who's that?" Rowena stopped breathing for a split second, and her cheeks gradually turned bloodless. After a while, Hans brought in Instructor Leach, who was still weak from the injury. Seeing Instructor Leach, Rowena completely panicked. "He's still alive. Stone actually didn't manage to kill him." Nicholas looked at Instructor Leach. "Tell us everything." Instructor Leach did not want to betray Rowena at first. But he no longer cared when he learned that his brother had died. "Mr. Goldman, see, Elder Master Goldman, Miss Summers is indeed the mastermind. When Winona died, Miss Summers used my brother's life to force me into helping her out. That's when I found out that Miss Summers was the one who asked Stone to release the pit viper to harm Ms. Vanderbilt. You're full of bullshit." Rowena still wanted to argue. Instructor Leach ignored her. "You know best whether I'm bullshitting or not. Are you telling me that my brother died not because of your plan to shut him up? You sent Stone to assassinate me, and he told me everything that day. Everyone that knows what you've done must die." He scoffed coldly after saying so. "I might have died long ago if Mr. Boucher hadn't bumped into me that day." Titus' expression turned extremely indifferent and disappointed as he stared at Rowena. Rowena shook her head. "No, it's not me. Stone did it himself. I have nothing to do with it." Instructor Leach said coldly. "I'm afraid that you still have no idea about this. My brother actually sent me a recording before Mr. Goldman captured him. He specifically told me that I should hand this recording to Mr. Goldman if you were to go back on your word and want to kill me in the future." He then took out the recorder and handed it to Titus. Titus took the recorder from Instructor Leach and played the content in it. It was a conversation between his brother and Rowena. "Stone, Miss Summers, please don't implicate my brother. I don't want my brother to be involved in this matter. Rowena, if you really want to save your brother's life, you'd better get him to cooperate with me. Otherwise, don't blame me for killing him. Rowena, you've been working by Stone's side for so long, and you still don't know my ways of doing things? I don't raise pieces of trash, so don't give me any more horseshit, or I'll get to your brother now." "Stone, I understand. Miss Summers. What do you want me to do? Rowena, since that bitch is so lucky that even a pit viper can't kill her, it seems that we can only end Winona instead and then put the blame on that bitch. The atmosphere in the room was dead silent when the recording ended. Rowena's face was bloodless. And her whole body was shivering. That fucker actually recorded our conversation. Seeing Titus' gloomy face, Rowena walked over. Grandpa, it's not like that. A slap resounded throughout the whole room. Rowena froze in place, and when she saw Titus' furious face, the excruciating pain on her cheek dragged her back from the trance. Titus was almost in disbelief and annoyed at the fact that she had deceived him. Rowena, you've disappointed me. Grandpa, I'm sorry. She knelt down in front of Titus, jerked the hem of his trousers, and wept bitterly. I've made such a mistake because I was dazzled by hatred. I love Nolan so much that I hate and envy Maisie. I only wanted to punish her so that she would leave Nolan. Chapter 398. Grandpa, you must know that I love Nolan. Everything that I do for Nolan. Titus flung her hands off his trousers. You did everything for Nolan? You actually ignored Nolan's well-being and life. And you still have the guts to say that you're doing all these for him? Rowena's pupils constricted. No, I really didn't do that. I admit, and I'm behind Winona's death, but what happened to Nolan was all on Stone. I really don't know anything about that. Titus did not even look at her crying face. I wanted to believe in you originally, and I did tell you that I can protect you, but what you've done has exceeded line. Not to mention that Nolan is still my grandson. Titus looked coldly at her as she said so and knelt on the floor. You can even do something like committing murder, so what else can't you do? And how can you make me believe that you're innocent? Even though what happened that night had nothing to do with her, what she did this time around is not just a tiny mistake. It has already violated the bottom line of being a human. So how can I feel at ease with the fact that I'm leaving someone who can disregard a man's life by Nolan's side? Titus turned his back on Rowena. Go and turn yourself in. Turn myself in? Rowena slumped on the floor. How can I turn myself in? My life will be ruined if I go to prison. Rowena grabbed the scissors on the table abruptly and was about to stab herself. Hans quickly subdued her on the ground before Titus could even respond. He then kicked the scissors that were dropped on the floor. Calm yourself down. Miss Summers. Although Hans was disappointed with her behavior, he did not want her to do something stupid. Rowena sobbed and then cried out loud, let me die, please. I can't go to prison. I don't want to ruin the Summers' reputation because I've done something wrong. I don't want my deceased parents to be disappointed in me. Grandpa. You promised my parents to take good care of me, so please don't send me to prison. I can go anywhere except prison. Seeing that Titus did not respond to her, she cried and crawled to his feet. Grandpa. I've always been by your side, and you've always treated me like your granddaughter. So please let me go this time. I really don't want to go to prison. I know what I've done is wrong. I won't do it anymore. I can die now if you want me to pay with my life. I'd rather die than go to prison. I beg you, Grandpa. I promise that I'll never appear before Nolan again, I promise. Titus closed his eyes tightly. Rowena had been following him around all the time since she was a child. She was a child that he had brought up by himself. So how could he accept the fact that she had done such a thing? However, he also knew that Rowena's life would really be ruined if she were to be sent to prison. After all, the Goldmans still owed the Summers a favor and a life. He did not look back at all. Go. Don't let me see you again. The kindness that the Summers showed me in the past is considered clear from today onward. Sherry was stunned. Is Elder Master Goldman really letting Rowena go? Seeing that Titus finally let her go for the sake of the Summers, Rowena bit her lip and stood up slowly. Thank you, Grandpa. You take care. She turned around and walked away. The moment she walked out of the mansion, the sadness and agony on her face disappeared in an instant, and gloominess replaced them. At the private hospital, Mr. Winters sat on the bed and stared blankly out the window while Maisie sat on the chair beside him. She did not say anything until Nolan went out to answer a call. Mr. Winters. He did not look away from the window. This is our retribution, isn't it? Chapter 399. It seemed that Mr. Winters was talking to himself. Maisie's eyes drooped slightly as she pursed her lips. Are you feeling better? What's the use of recovering? Mr. Winters scoffed at himself. Both my wife and daughter are now gone. So why am I still alive? Mr. Winters could not accept the reality. In fact, no one should be able to accept this. Maisie's eyes drooped once again. You should understand deep down why and how these things happened. Mr. Winters was startled. He then lowered his head bleakly, feeling a little ashamed. Yes, I admit, we shouldn't have been greedy. He thought of something and continued. Actually, my wife and I were devastated when we received the news of our daughter's death. When we went to the training camp to inquire and found out that our daughter had committed suicide, it was really hard for us to keep ourselves calm. The training camp did compensate us, saying that we should stay in the Grand Hotel of Bassburg and wait for Winnie's autopsy results. However, a woman came to us one day. Mr. Winters folded his fingers as if there was a heavy stone in his chest cavity, weighing him down. She told us that you're responsible for our daughter's death, that you're the one who forced her to death. She then provided us with your work address. And that's how my wife and I went to find you. We were also overwhelmed by the huge amount of money, so we planned to take it for ourselves. Anyway, our daughter has died. But we didn't expect. He covered his face and cried, that woman really wanted to kill us. I had been on guard from the beginning, but we didn't escape death after all. He regretted it and blamed himself for everything that had taken place. But what good would it do? Maisie did not continue to disturb him and left the ward quietly. Nolan had also ended the phone call at that moment. She walked up to his back. How are things going at Mr. Goldma? Father sighed. Grandfather still let that woman go for the sake of the kindness that the Summers had shown him in the past, Nolan replied in a deep voice as his expression dimmed slightly. Maisie pursed her lips and held his cold hand. Since your grandfather already knows about her true colors, she probably won't be able to escape again if she makes another move. Nolan turned around, took her into his arms, and kissed her forehead. There's no need to comfort me. Maisie looked away. I'm not comforting you. Thinking of something, she asked, by the way, why did you let father do this? Was he worried that his grandfather wouldn't believe in what we say? Nolan wrapped one arm around her waist and smiled. That stupid girl, Sherry, had told Rowena all the details of our plans. So Rowena might be able to come up with an excuse to escape this matter if we were the one to confront her this time around. Maisie grabbed his tie with an inattentive expression. But still, she's escaped it unscathed, hasn't she? TSK. It's a pity that we couldn't send her to prison. He smirked. She won't get to live a better life even if she isn't sent to prison. Grandfather might let this slide for the sake of the Summers, but Dad won't. The next day, Dena Jewelry was officially established as Soul Jewelry. And there were a lot of customers when it first opened. The lobby was divided into two areas, A and B. Area A was designated for custom-made jewelry that could be collected. The price of all the jewelry exhibited here was exorbitant, but their designs were unique. An appointment was required to be able to take a step into this area. Area B was an area delegated to ordinary sales, just like a jewelry boutique. It sold existing ready-made jewelry, which was also in short supply. Soul Jewelry was the only jewelry brand in Bassburg that focused on its Gothic collection, and since everyone knew that the designer of the brand was Zora, it was almost packed that day. Maisie was too busy even to leave her seat even though she was only there to take custom orders. Maisie. who had just sent a guest away, turned around only to see Madame Nera slowly approaching in a wheelchair with the help of a female subordinate. Chapter 400. Madame Nera, you're here. Maisie smiled and stepped forward to welcome her. Madame Nera gave off a kind smile. I heard that your company is officially open now. So I definitely had to come over to support you. Maisie approached her and half-squatted so the old lady did not have to look up to talk to her out of courtesy and respect. Then my business will definitely skyrocket with your support. I'm afraid that all my fellow jewelry company owners in the entire Basberg would be jealous of me, wouldn't they? Madame Nera smiled brightly. You do know how to praise an old woman. Maisie pushed her to the VIP room in her wheelchair and poured a cup of tea for her. Madam, how's your health recently? Don't worry, it's more than just fine. Madame Nera picked up the teacup and blew at the vapor on the surface of the tea. It's been quite some time since we last met. I thought you had forgotten about me. Maisie grinned. How is that possible? I'll forget about everyone else first, before I forget about you. Madame Nera took a sip of tea and said, You promised me that you would use a year to make your jewelry known internationally. I think it'll take less than a year now. Maisie paused for a split second and then said with a chuckle. We're just having a good start now. Madame Nera waved her hand. A good start is a good start. You have to give credit where it's due. Or else why would I come to meet you today? I have an opportunity to offer you right now. An opportunity? Madame Nera continued before Maisie could react. The Staslos Sheena Jewelry Show will be held at the beginning of next month, and this is your opportunity. I know that you've been to the Sheena Jewelry Show before this, but you were representing a luxury brand back then. You'll be representing your own brand this time around. Maisie had indeed been invited to the Sheena Jewelry Show in the past. That was when the Oriental-style jewelry that she had designed while she was working for Luxella Inc. started to attract attention. When Zora's name was mentioned in Staslo, everyone only knew that she was a jewelry designer who worked under Luxella Incorporated, and all her creations only belonged to Luxella. It was just like any creation. No matter how well one's creations were, the creator would only be a world-renowned name as long as the copyright did not belong to him or her. However, Soul Jewelry was Maisie's own brand. So, what do you think? Would you consider attending the jewelry show? Madame Nera asked with a smile. Maisie nodded and put down the teacup. Yes, of course. After Madame Nera left, Sherry came to her and apologized for what had happened the other day. Maisie, I'm sorry. I trusted Rowena too much before this. So I told her about your meeting with Mr. Lucas. Maisie did not care too much either, but teased her instead. Nolan said that you trust others too easily. But it's alright, you'll start to remember this after being deceived a few more times. Sherry chuckled in embarrassment. I don't think that's a good thing to do. I've gotten myself into such huge trouble this time. Wouldn't Nolan skin me alive if anything were to happen to Maisie again? She then thought of something and added, by the way, Maisie, Rowena is a wanted woman now. Wanted? Maisie was stunned for a short second and looked up at her. Didn't Elder Master Goldman let her off? She nodded. Yes, Elder Master Goldman did let her go, but Mr. Goldman Sr. didn't. Mr. Goldman Street offered a $1 million reward for Rowena. Unless Rowena is competent enough to be able to escape this or undergo plastic surgery, it will be almost impossible for her to escape again if she gets caught this time around. She chuckled after saying so. Rowena must be hiding somewhere, living a happy life, thinking that Elder Master Goldman had let her go this time. But Mr. Goldman Sr. claimed arrogantly that letting her go is Elder Master Goldman's decision, and it's his decision to arrest Rowena. The two agendas don't conflict at all.